Hey guys, welcome back to BB Fantasy Football. With week 1 in the books, we're going to be going over a week 1 review and then looking ahead into week 2 to see what bets and players we like going into the week.
This week was definitely tough. We had a lot of performances we didn't think going to happen.
Yeah.
Something I saw on Twitter is week 1 is never going to go the way that we expect it to be. You think one thing, it's the complete other thing is going to happen.
Yeah,
and I think
exactly.
there's a lot of perfect examples of that. So we'll start right at the top, start with little Thursday Night Football Chiefs-Ravens action. Jump straight into it.
So going into it, nobody really saw Isaiah Likely coming in with 26 fantasy points, taking over that role from Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews was basically a left tackle out there, wasn't doing anything, and Likely was lining up out wide and getting most of the targets from Lamar Jackson. I think going into next week, Isaiah Likely should be top priority on the waiver wire if he isn't picked up already.
And while he calls him Isaiah Likely, call him Isaiah Unlikely, because I find that it's unlikely he keeps up this current tradition that he's on. I think Mark Andrews, he was obviously injured in an accident on August 16th, didn't really come back to practice until the 31st. Needs that time to kind of come back, and we've all seen what he can do. I feel like Mark Andrews always kind of has a slow start to the season. If we look back, we've seen that's kind of a trend. So going forward, I think we can start to trust Mark Andrews a little bit more, but I think you're right. For next week, we should be looking at Likely.
This is our official notice to not panic on Derrick Henry. He played probably the best defensive line he's going to play all season, and I think he's just going to be going up from here. With that being said, though, if Justice Hill is available on the waivers, I would definitely go and pick him up, because when they're down or they're in a third down or 2-minute drill scenario, they're going to be leaning on him heavily.
Someone that I like, at least for dynasty stashes, is obviously Keaton Mitchell, and I think for their dynasty stash, if you have him in your taxi squad, I think you're lucky. Rasheen Ali, I think he could definitely start to eat into that work when he's a little bit healthier. But yeah, I think going forward, just with the game script that we saw, Justice Hill was obviously going to get more. That last drive, 2-minute drill, wasn't encouraging, to say the least, not to see Derrick Henry out there, but he is, 31 now?
Yeah.
Kind of getting up there. They want to preserve him a little bit more. I think we can expect him to be a 3-down back in the games where the Ravens really just want to pound the run game.
Last thing on the Ravens, Lamar Jackson looks faster and better than ever. He came off of the offseason where he lost about 20-25 pounds, and he's looking extremely fast. I'm loving his outlook for the rest of the season. I think he's going to be a stud.
On the Chiefs side of things, I think something that a lot of people thought was going to happen was Samaje Perine kind of eating into Isaiah Pacheco's work a little bit, but we didn't really see that much. We saw Perine come in for a possession or two, was able to get a reception off, but I think we can really trust Isaiah Pacheco to be an RB1 in this offense. He had that every down role. He did catch a couple receptions. I think he's going to get in the end zone a bunch this year.
Yeah, and going into Xavier Worthy, I think once Hollywood Brown comes back into that offense, he might see a little bit less volume, even though his volume in this past game was only 4 touches. But for the meantime, until Hollywood Brown comes back, I would definitely put him into your lineups.
I think if you guys want a great value pick, you could potentially snag Xavier Worthy, Offensive Rookie of the Year. I know a lot of the other receivers had a slow start, so his odds might be a little bit up and down right now.
Yeah.
But like Soren said, just kind of keep an eye out for that boomer bust ability that he's going to have on every single play.
Yeah.
Final thing about the Chiefs is don't overreact to Travis Kelce's performance. We've seen what he's able to do. I think I had mentioned that he's going to get that inside space, whereas Xavier Worthy kind of draws the deep targets. I think we'll continue to see the exact same thing. That Ravens defense is going to be tough, no matter who they play against. Obviously, the Chiefs did pull it out, but I think we can expect to see more of that rollout game that we saw from that one catch that Kelce did have.
Yeah. Going into our Friday night game of Eagles versus Packers, there's a lot to unpack here, especially with that Jordan Love injury at the end of the game. Primary takeaways, Jaden Reed looked like an absolute baller out there. I think he's going to keep this pace up when Jordan Love comes back. Malik Willis looked like a statue in the pocket for those 3 plays he played, so I don't really anticipate any production from these guys for the next couple of weeks.
And just going back to Reed might be tough, like you said, the next couple of weeks to get those targets.
Yeah.
But I felt like in comparison to last year, instead of him having just that boomer bust ability, he was able to create space in the secondary. He's able to kind of dig into the corners and the safeties and find his own space rather than a little pass off here or just an end around. He's really able to create space, and I feel like he's sort of establishing himself as that number 1 receiver in the offense.
Definitely. We did see some targets go to Romeo Doubs and Dontavian Wicks, and a couple went to Musgrave, but he wasn't able to bring any of them in. Their offense is definitely going to be widespread, especially with Christian Watson finally being healthy. I think this offense could be pretty deadly once Jordan Love comes back from that injury.
A sleeper in that offense is going to be Tucker Kraft. I felt like he dominated the route running in terms of tight end. Like you said, Musgrave got a few targets. I felt like Kraft got a few too. It is going to be a tough couple weeks for these next It's going to be a tough couple weeks for these guys with Malik Willis there, but I think Tucker Kraft can establish himself as that number one tight end in Green Bay, whether that means a trade or Luke Musgrave or whatever the case may be. I think he's going to be the guy who steps in there.
Moving on to the Eagles, Giants fans, hold your breath. Saquon Barkley looked in tip-top shape, and he's going to destroy you guys for the next two matchups. Saquon Barkley looked absolutely phenomenal in that Friday night game, putting up almost 150 total yards from scrimmage and 3 touchdowns. He's going to be a stud this year, and I don't see him slowing down. If you followed our picks on TikTok, we had Saquon Barkley going over 6.5 rushing touchdowns this year. He's already at 2 out of the 7, so he's looking real good.
And yeah, that rushing attack looks great, but I do got to ask, what do you think of Jalen Hurts and his rushing upside as far as the rest of the season goes?
I think he's definitely a threat in the run game, but as we saw in the few tush-push attempts that they did have, Jason Kelce not being there is a huge negative for them. Cam Jurgens wasn't able to hold up that line, and we saw it on a 3rd and 4th down attempt where they weren't able to get the first down. So look to them to move to Barkley more on those short yard scenarios.
Something that was really encouraging from that Eagles offense, I felt like, was Devontae Smith getting those immediate routes.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like the Eagles tapped into that as much as they should have the last couple seasons, because we saw at Alabama he is a wide receiver 1, and yet he has to step into that wide receiver 2 volume type of role. But at the same time, A.J. Brown is a guy who's going to get you a 60-yard touchdown. He's going to get you, a 15-yard play and then catch and run. But Devontae Smith is going to be the guy 3rd and 10, 3rd and 9. Who are you going to go to? Who's going to be there in the crunch time? I think that's Devontae Smith, and I really like the way that the Eagles kind of slid into that role.
Yeah. Moving on to the Sunday slate, first game we have is Bengals and Patriots. Surprising outcome for everybody. No one saw that coming.
Yeah.
Ramondre Stevenson for sure surprised a lot of people. He pulled up with 25 carries for 120 yards and a touchdown. I don't think anybody saw that coming, especially with the changes that they made there. But that Patriots offense did not look great outside of Stevenson. So.
I felt like they didn't really establish a clear wide receiver 1. I thought Jalen Polk might step into that. I thought Pop Douglas might step into that. I didn't feel like there was no number 1 out there.
Yeah.
And they had Jacoby Brissett out there, type of a veteran, someone who should be able to get the ball out to his receivers. So I think that's not very encouraging just in terms of overall team production. They are going to have to lean on Ramondre Stevenson once again week over week. And it's just going to be a wait-and-see game. I think there could be some helpful stashes in there, but if you're looking at a guy like Kayshon Boutte, some of those guys on the lower end, I don't even think it's worth it to take a look at them right now.
Bengals cannot get anything going. Part of it, I feel like Joe Burrow is still healing from that wrist injury he had last season. You could tell he was holding back a little bit. There's this one play when Jamar Chase had broken free on a 30-yard, 40-yard deep, and Burrow just didn't take the risk with that throw and ended up checking it down. And I think we're going to see that for the next few weeks where Joe Burrow's maybe still healing from that injury or needs to get a little more comfortable throwing the ball down the field. So definitely keep an eye on this Bengals offense, especially with T. Higgins not in the lineup. I would look to see him lean more on his running backs in the coming weeks.
Diving into those running backs in and of themselves, I think a guy that people were really looking at was Chase Brown. Really expecting him to dominate that backfield, and I think a lot of it goes back to that one play he had last season, and I know you know what I'm talking about. But we did really see Zach Moss on Indianapolis take over last season, and I think that the Bengals saw that through training camp. They saw that he can lead the backfield, whereas Chase Brown might take that secondary role into those potentially receiving down types of things where he really flourished last season.
Yeah.
Now Zach Moss can continue with the volume. I wouldn't say he's an RB1, maybe a lower end RB2, even RB3 territory, but he is someone that you could potentially trust if we continue to see the Bengals offense improve a little bit.
Yeah. And with that Zach Moss volume, if he does go down, Chase Brown would automatically be a plug into your lineup. With both of them in the backfield, we only saw Chase Brown get 6 touches. He had 3 carries for 11 yards and 3 receptions for 12 yards. So there wasn't much going for him in that game against the Patriots. But definitely in the future, especially if Zach Moss goes down, he'll have some more production.
Now let's talk Bears-Titans. Everyone was anticipating this game. We're talking about the number 1 pick. We're talking about Caleb Williams. Big playability is there. We've kind of all expected to see it in game 1. And I think that's something that we just have to work on with rookies. Kind of temper expectations in that first game. We'll go over the other 2 rookies as well, but none of them looked particularly great in terms of passing the ball. As far as Caleb Williams goes, I wasn't too impressed by the way that he was able to get the ball out to his guys, but I did see some drops. There was definitely a drop from Keenan Allen. There was a drop, I believe, from Rome Odunze. So some things to work on. I think it's a lot of growing pains. We didn't see him much in the preseason, so I guess we'll have to kind of wait and see on him.
Yeah. Something that hindered Caleb Williams' performance was that offensive line. That offensive line play was just terrible on Sunday. We saw the Titans' defensive line just do whatever they want. I think there was this one play when the Bears were in the red zone. They had a blitzing linebacker come in and just run the center over, and Caleb Williams had no time to throw the ball.
It's going to be a lot of what we saw at USC, those boom or bust plays, and he's going to have to move forward and make those plays in order to have a successful offense. Now, if we're talking about the other side of the ball, that's a different story. I was personally very impressed with the way the defense played. I know a lot of it has to do with Will Levis, and but they did look particularly sharp, especially securing the win towards the end. I don't know, your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought the Bears' defense looked really well. Both their touchdowns on Sunday came from the defense and special teams side. They were able to get to Will Levis, make him to make some errant throws. Definitely going to be a problem in the coming weeks and for the rest of the season. But on the offensive side of the ball, if they don't make improvements, they're just going to have a rough going. I think the same could be said for Tennessee. Their offense looked absolutely atrocious as well. Meanwhile, their defense was balling out. Although we did see some sparks from Tony Pollard, he ripped off a 26-yard touchdown. There wasn't much to rave about coming out of that Titans game, other than the fact that both Pollard and Spears will be viable fantasy options this coming season. Moving on to our next 1 o'clock game, we had Steelers versus Falcons in Atlanta. Kirk Cousins coming off of that torn Achilles. He did not look particularly well. They had a terrible second half. We're only gaining 54 yards of offense. Meanwhile, the Steelers' defense, as usual, always playing great, keeping the opposing offense in check, and I think they're going to be a problem this year as well. I didn't really have a lot of expectations for Kirk Cousins coming into this game, especially coming off that torn Achilles at 36 years old. He wasn't able to plant his feet on some of his throws, leading to a bunch of underthrows and missed targets. I think, especially as the season goes on, he'll definitely improve on that, but maybe for the first couple of weeks he's going to be struggling getting back into the groove and making sure that foot is healthy for him to plant.
Yeah, I think an important part of kind of the reason the Falcons weren't really able to get their footing was obviously his injury. But also I saw something where Kirk's feet have been offset throughout his entire career pre-snap. He's always had that offset style. And for the entire Falcons game this past weekend, his feet were level with each other. Obviously, that's a small thing, but at the same time, in terms of a quarterback's rhythm, I feel like that's something that definitely played a part. I'm not sure if he's going to go back to his original ways or if the Falcons have maybe found something there that they like. But I do think he needs to kind of find some sort of stability there before he can even snap the ball, right? Something that we'll have to just monitor going forward. And just bouncing off that I think Drake London is a potential buy low candidate. A lot of people are selling on him. They're worried about him. There's not a lot of options in that offense. So when Kirk does get back on his feet, we've seen what he's done with Vikings receivers. Stephon Diggs, Justin Jefferson. I don't think we have too much to worry about in terms of volume. In terms of them winning games, I think that's a different story.
Yeah. We did see an increase in Bijan Robinson's volume this week, bringing up 18 carries for 63 yards and 4 catches for 43 yards. He definitely looked great this week, and I think he's going to keep going upwards the rest of the season. The only tripe I did have, well, they were playing a top 5, top 10 defense. He was only averaging 3.6 yards a carry. I don't anticipate that being the case for the rest of the season, but definitely something to look out for behind that offensive line.
What was really great in this game between the Steelers and the Falcons was TJ Watt. I think we're ready for another defensive player of the year for him. He looked like it too. He was involved in almost every play. There was a play where he got the strip, he got the sack, and he got the fumble. And I feel like that kind of just defines TJ Watt. We see him come out every year. There's usually questions about his health. But really besides that, he is an elite player, and he shows the Steelers' willingness to win. They're the team that's always going to finish just a little bit above average. And I think that we can expect something similar from them this year.
Moving into week 2, it looks like Russell Wilson's also not going to be getting the start, meaning Justin Fields is going to have another shot at it next week. I think he's going to take full advantage of this opportunity behind that new and improved offensive line. He looked pretty solid this week, didn't miss on a lot of throws, was pretty agile in the pocket, escaping when he needed to, and I think he's going to keep that up next week against a okay Broncos defense. Staying with that Steelers offense, it's pretty clear that George Pickens is going to be that number 1 target in there, along with Pat Freiermuth as a number 2. George Pickens looked really good, bringing in a couple deep bombs, and I think as the season progresses, whether he's playing with Russ, whether he's playing with Fields, he's going to improve on that and definitely be a viable fantasy player for the rest of the season. Moving on to Giants-Vikings, Daniel Jones fucking sucks. That Giants offense could not get anything going with him under center. He just looked like a statue out there. He had a couple good plays to Malik Neighbors, but outside of that, he wasn't able to run the ball effectively. He was missing open receivers, making shitty reads. I think the most memorable play from that game is when Daniel Jones just was throwing a screen pass to Wan'Dale Robinson and Andrew Van Ginkel just hopped over and returned for a touchdown. Like, what are we doing? Come on.
And I think Daniel Jones should be worried about getting a spot taken from Tommy DeVito. We'll have to see in the next few starts. I have a feeling he's going to start week 2, potentially week 3. But if this trend does continue, I think guys like Neighbors and Robinson are going to get fed up, and they're going to have to bring someone in.
Yeah. We're either going to see Tommy DeVito come in or Drew Lock come in and definitely give a spark to this offense that Daniel Jones cannot provide right now.
Give me Drew Lock.
Moving on to the Vikings side of the ball, nothing really impressive from the Giants. So Vikings looked as good as you would expect them to look. Jefferson had like 4 catches for 59 yards and he brought in a touchdown. Aaron Jones looked spectacular on the ground behind that offensive line, running one in for a touchdown as well. Outside of that, Sam Darnold looked very efficient and very calm under center behind that new Vikings offensive line and scheme. I think that offense is going to be pretty average, above average going for the rest of the season, and I like the outlook on that for the rest of the year.
I think in terms of volume for the guys who played, Aaron Jones is someone that we can consistently rely on. Justin Jefferson is someone we can consistently rely on, and I think a weekly potential flex play in the future is Jalen Naylor, as he kind of fills in that role. I know Addison got hurt. He's kind of stepping into that big receiver, big X receiver and Hawkinson role at the same time. So those end zone targets, like we saw him catch a touchdown. I think that's something that we may be able to expect from him going forward. We will have to see how his volume shakes out, but he does look good.
Yeah. All right, moving on to the next game, we have Texans versus Colts. This is probably the best game on Sunday. We had a lot of great plays, a lot of big touchdowns, lots to unpack here.
Yeah, there was a lot going on. I felt like in terms of, let's start with Houston, their wide receiver core looked really great. In terms of the way that CJ Stroud is really able to get the ball out. He was able to get the ball out to Joe Mixon a few times, get it to Tank Dell, get it to Diggs for 2 end zone touches, and at the same time, that deep playability was still there with Nico Collins.
Yeah. Joe Mixon also looked like vintage Joe Mixon, even though he's not even like very old. That Texans offensive line was able to hold up, and we saw what they were trying to do all of last year with Devin Singletary. They weren't able to get the ground game going, but this week they had 30 attempts with Mixon for over 150 yards and a touchdown. I expect them to lean more on the run this season, especially with the new addition of Joe Mixon. I think it's going to be great for that offense and a great change of pace for them going forward.
Some targets that you might see from the Texans offense in terms of some sell now. I don't think you should sell Nico Collins. I don't think you should sell Tank Dell. I think Stephon Diggs is the guy to sell high on right now. He did have 6 catches, but really, a measly 30 yards. And like I said, CJ Stroud found him in the end zone twice, which is great in terms of football value. But fantasy-wise, if you drafted him in the 3rd round and you think you can get that return back, I'd sell him now. There's 3 receivers in that offense, 3 guys we're going to eat.
Moving on to the Colts, Anthony Richardson,
QB1,
looking fantastic. He made some insane throws that, honestly, I don't even know how he made them. He had this one bomb in the first quarter where he slipped, went up, had 2 guys in his face, and just threw a 60-yard missile to Alec Pierce for a touchdown. Just probably throw of the year in my opinion. And I think he's just going to be getting better as the season goes on. You'd see he has a lot of zip on the ball. The one thing I had was when he doesn't have a lot of zip, he tends to miss his passes, and we saw that he had 1 interception in the red zone. He had a couple balls that went over the receivers' heads. And I think that's just going to come with practice, come with the game reps that he's getting throughout the season. He's definitely going to be a great QB option going for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and with that dual kind of rushing ability that he has, I don't think we'll have to worry about him in terms of quarterback play. He's locked in for me as a top 5 quarterback rest of season, and we'll continue to see those points increase.
Yeah. One of our other favorite waiver pickups for this week is Alec Pierce. Josh Downs was injured this week, and we saw Alec Pierce take a elevated role in that offense. He caught 2 deep bombs, one of them going for a touchdown. And I think with his size and his speed, Anthony Richardson is going to keep trying to find him deep when he can. So he's definitely near the top of my list for waiver pickups for this week.
Let's talk about the Colts receivers a little bit more. Kind of a big mess this week. We saw Alec Pierce go for 120 receiving yards. We saw Michael Pittman basically do nothing. Josh Downs wasn't out there. So what do we make of all this? I think that there is some level of panic you can have with Michael Pittman, not because of the player that he is, but I think that the way that Anthony Richardson moves the ball is a little bit different than the system he was accustomed to with Minshew. I think Downs is that guy in this offense. I think we'll see that once he bounces back from injury. And like you said, a good waiver wire add is Alec Pierce, because with that big playability he has, got a big frame, is able to go get those jump balls. I think that he is going to be a boomer bust every single week.
Looking at Jonathan Taylor, he had 15 carries or 16 carries for 48 yards. They did play a great D-line with Houston, but I'm not really worried about him going into the next few weeks for the rest of the season. He's still going to be a top RB1 option, and I think going forward he's going to have a lot of success with the read option with Anthony Richardson.
If someone is panicking on Jonathan Taylor, he is a perfect buy now candidate. Wouldn't recommend selling on him, but if someone in your league is, go grab him for the right price.
Moving on to Jaguars-Dolphins. This was a pretty slow game to start. Started getting more exciting in the second half. We saw a lot of big plays, especially Tyreek getting handcuffed in the end zone and outside the stadium. Great outlook for both of these teams. One of my biggest takeaways, though, is that Raheem Mostert looked completely inefficient. He was not used as much as Achane was. And if you could buy low on him, I would. I don't see them straying away from the 2 running back attack that they had last season, and I think Mostert would still be a really good option in this offense. Jags defense is still pretty good, so look for Miami to start using both running backs a lot more than just using one.
As far as the Jags offense goes, I think it was really encouraging to see Brian Thomas really come out as, I'd say, the most dominating rookie receiver of the weekend. In terms of the way he was able to command targets, the way he was able to create separation. It was really encouraging for the people who kind of saw him as a big play guy rather than an intermediate play type of player, and the way that Trevor Lawrence was able to get the ball out to him. Someone that I think there may be some level of panic on is Christian Kirk. I'd say it's fair, but at the same time, don't fully panic on him yet. He is still a solid receiver, and every year that we've underrated him, he's consistently proven us wrong.
Yeah. And before the season started, Trevor Lawrence's implied passing yards per the Bucs was around 3,800 yards, and Brian Thomas's was only at 750. I don't see them straying away from using Ingram and Kirk either, so this was just a down week, and I think Ingram and Kirk are still going to be good options for the rest of the season, along with Thomas. And yeah, back in the Dolphins offense, Waddle and Hill, usual suspects, both went over 100 yards. Hill saw the end zone, nothing to worry about on that end. Achane had pulled in 6 screen passes and got 60 yards. He'll be fine the rest of the year. Just keep an eye on Mostert. Try to buy low on him if you can.
Something that I saw was someone had Achane locked as a top 5 running back for the rest of the season. Now, a lot of week 1 overreactions out there. What do you feel about that? Overreaction or underreaction?
I think it's a little bit of an overreaction. We saw that they only used Achane in that offense. They still have Jalen Wright, and as the season goes on, we're bound to see some injuries. I think Achane is not going to get the volume and production that everyone's anticipating he will, just because of his size. And I think they'll tend to lean more on Mostert in those power back scenarios, maybe down by the goal line, and maybe bring in Jalen Wright for a couple screens and third down scenarios. So I'm definitely still high on Achane, but I just don't know if I would put him at top 5 just yet. Moving on to the worst game of Sunday, Saints versus Panthers. I am getting rid of every single Panthers player. I'm not starting a single one. There was nothing promising coming out of that game. Their defense looked horrible, and now with the injury of Derrick Brown, who's likely to be season-ending, they're going to be playing from behind almost every week. I don't anticipate them playing well. The only good options in that team, I would maybe start Deontay Johnson and maybe Chuba. With the outlook that they're going to be playing from behind and not having many leads, I don't see him getting a lot of running work anyway. I would say the best option you have in that offense is Deontay Johnson. Going forward, I would try to sell your Panthers players or buy low on Deontay Johnson.
Yeah, I think Bryce Young, at least for me, this was kind of his chance to come out and show us that he made some improvements. And from the jump, I mean, first throw. So we kind of saw that Dave Canales offense maybe isn't working with Bryce Young. Maybe they're not meshing well together, whatever the case may be. I'm agreeing with Soren here. I'm dropping every single Panthers player.
On the flip side, there's a lot to rave about for the Saints offense. Derek Carr looked like how he did 3 years ago with that Raiders offense. Alvin Kamara looked in prime form. I mean, they were playing the Panthers, but he was able to get into the end zone. He was averaging almost 6-7 yards a carry. I think he's going to be a great option. And honestly, he was a steal in a lot of your guys' drafts. I think he's going to be good for the rest of the year.
What's your panic meter on Chris Olave?
I'm not panicking. I think the Saints had a great scheme ready for that game. They just attacked when they could, and Chris Olave just wasn't the one getting open. And they leaned a lot more on the run. Derek Carr, I think, had a little over 200 passing yards. They took an early lead. They were up 23-0 halfway through the second quarter. So they tended to stray away from the pass. And I think going into next week, especially against Dallas, Chris Olave might have a lot more opportunities and looks. And I think there's nothing to panic about. I think he'll still be good for the rest of the year.
A bet that I really like for any Saints game going forward, Taysom Hill, anytime touchdown scorer. He's consistently a threat to run the ball. We actually saw him almost, 30-40 yard contested catch he almost made in the end zone.
Yeah.
So we'll look to see his volume go up. And it was a blowout. We can't really expect to see our normal fantasy stats from either side.
Yeah. Going into our last game of the 1 o'clock slate, we had the Arizona Cardinals playing in Buffalo against the Bills. I think both sides looked fantastic on offense, and honestly on defense too, we saw a lot of good plays, and I think both these teams are set up to have decent and good seasons.
Biggest question being, what happened with Marvin Harrison Jr.?
Marvin might have actually been the biggest disappointment of week 1, only pulling in 3 targets with 1 reception for 4 yards. I'm sure you've all seen the clip where he's running down the sideline on the Cardinals game-winning drive. He was wide open and Kyler just didn't see him. Again, I'm not panicking on Marvin. I think if people are selling him, you should definitely go out and try to get him. This was just a fluke week. There's no way they're going to spend top 3, top 4 draft capital on a receiver and not utilize him. Nothing to worry about. He's going to be fine going forward. I would definitely buy low on him if you can.
Another player that I like in that Cardinals offense is Greg Dortch. It seems like it's going to take a little bit longer for Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison to find that chemistry, and Greg Dortch is going to be that guy moving forward. Trey McBride also, we saw him have a little bit of a tough time with Kyler Murray in terms of chemistry, but I think that has a lot to do with the fact that Kyler Murray just couldn't get the ball out as much this game. We saw James Conner really dominate the run, and I think moving forward, there's no need to panic on Trey McBride.
Yeah. Honestly, there's no room to panic on any tight ends going after week 1. The highest scoring tight end was Isaiah Likely, and Foster Moreau from the Saints was the second highest scoring tight end. So just wait a week on the tight ends, see if anything changes. But if anyone's panicking, go and buy Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, George Kittle, Travis Kelce. If any of them are being sold, go and buy them. Moving on to the 4 o'clock games. The first one we had was Raiders versus Chargers. I gotta say, I'm very impressed with J.K. Dobbins. I don't know what I was expecting. I just wasn't expecting him to go for 13 yards a carry and a touchdown coming off of 2 torn Achilles. He looked absolutely fantastic behind that offensive line, and you could tell that Joe Alt was a great pick. He was probably my favorite rookie of week 1, and it showed in how efficient that run game was for that Chargers offense.
Yeah, he dominated Max Crosby. There's no other way to put it. Joe Alt did dominate Max Crosby this week. Now, as far as the passing game goes, we knew that Harbaugh was going to come in and he's going to establish the run game right away. And I think with the emergence of Dobbins, kind of with Edwards as his backup, we're going to continue to see the same. We did see Ladd McConkey go grab a touchdown. We saw Herbert kind of flash his same abilities that he's always had. But we can trust the Chargers are going to be ground and pound to try to get that win every single week.
Moving over to the Raiders side, Zamir White did not live up to anyone's expectations. He actually put the ball on the ground. Not look good, with Alexander Madison scoring their lone touchdown. I think going forward, you might want to look into acquiring Alexander Madison either from the waiver wire or trading for him if you're a Zamir White owner. Outside of that, for the Raiders offense, nothing really stood out to me. Devontae Adams had 4 catches for about 59 yards. They just need to get their playmakers more involved. Saw flashes from Brock Bowers. He caught a deep out route to the sideline. Outside of that, nothing really impressive from that offense.
Yeah, definitely. I think we can see Brock Bowers is kind of a shining spot in the dark just because I didn't feel like the Raiders offense played well at all.
Yeah.
Gardner Minshew is at the helm, so we can't really expect them to be, some huge offense. But I like Brock Bowers to be a good dynasty starting tight end and potentially your tight end too in any other league.
Going to the next 4 o'clock game, we had the Broncos versus the Seahawks. This game was very, very interesting as it was the first time in a while we saw the same team get 2 safeties. I don't know what was going on with Seattle. They had the ball at the 1 yard line on 2 different drives. First time they had a holding call, and the second time Charbonnet just got tackled in the end zone. Their first half was not great by any means, but when the second half came around, we saw Kenneth Walker break off a lot of big runs. We saw the offense getting more in their rhythm and getting back to their usual self. And I think once the season progresses, we'll have a lot to rave about this offense.
I think the biggest thing for me is not to panic on DK and JSN. There's still a lot of room for them there, but T-Lock is not going anywhere anytime soon. In terms of the Broncos offense, Bo Nix is really alarming to me. Not because of the fact that he threw 2 picks, but because of the fact that he should have thrown 6 picks. And on top of that, threw about 40 passes and had less than 200 passing yards. I think those are all really discouraging factors. But at the same time, we need to allow rookies these growing pains to come into their own in terms of passing. But we did see a lot of this from him at Oregon that not a lot of people were impressed by. So definitely something just to keep a helpful eye out on.
For the Broncos, we did see Jaleel McLaughlin get a lot more of the third down back roll and receiving back roll than Javonte Williams did. I mean, he didn't really do much with his opportunity, but he brought in 5 receptions. So I would definitely keep an eye out for him. I don't think he's drafted in a lot of leagues, so if he's available on the waiver wire, I'd definitely pick him up because he would be a great option, especially if Javonte Williams goes down with injury.
Going into the Bucks versus Commanders, I thought the biggest takeaway for me was Baker Mayfield looked amazing. He looked, somewhat back to himself, somewhat back to those days in Cleveland. But at the same time, I thought that the Bucks just really meshed well together as a system. Mike Evans showed off his hands once again. We saw Chris Godwin get those intermediate passes that people were expecting, and I think going forward we can expect this Bucks offense to really have a chance to take the title again in their division. Something that I did kind of notice was that Bucky Irving is a very talented running back, and the way that he's able to get in and out of his breaks really impressed me, and that's the point where Rashad White really hasn't been able to do. I think they can really establish a 1-2 punch no matter who's the one. Maybe Bucky Irving takes the rushing carries and Rashad comes in and gets his 60-70 receiving yards, and that's something that would work for the Bucks.
Yeah. And another rookie that stood out to me was Jalen McMillan. I mean, he did drop his first target that would have gone in for a touchdown, but outside of that, I believe he did score, and he did look very well the rest of the game. I think both Bucky Irving and Jalen McMillan should be on your radar for either trades or waiver wire pickups. Moving on to the Commanders, Jaden Daniels probably had the best rookie quarterback performance out of the bunch we saw on Sunday. He ran it in for 2 rushing touchdowns, looked great on the ground, looked okay through the air. Again, same thing with Bo Nix. He's just going to build on this throughout the season. He's just going to get better. He still finished with 27 fantasy points. He's going to be a great fantasy QB the rest of the year, no doubt about it. But once he improves his passing game, he's going to be a lethal quarterback.
Yeah, similar to Anthony Richardson, I think he's going to dominate both sides of what it means to be a passing quarterback in the NFL. And I think as he improves his guys, Terry McLaurin, specifically the guy that I have an eye on right now is Luke McCaffrey. He's in our league, so don't pick him up because I'm going to take him. But I think Luke McCaffrey really steps into, like I had been talking about, that intermediate role where he's going to get in and out of his breaks and catch the passes, and I think Terry's going to be the deep ball guy. So definitely a guy to keep an eye out for is Luke McCaffrey.
Yeah. What did you think about the split between Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler?
I think it's pretty clear. We have Brian Robinson as the number 1 guy there, and Austin Eckler's getting old. I think Brian Robinson is someone that we can expect to continue to see large volume on, take a chunk of the carries, and I think he's an impressive receiver as well. So yeah. I think we can expect to see even Austin Eckler take a further step backward towards the season.
Yeah. Going into our last 4 o'clock game, we have the Cowboys versus the Cleveland Browns. Just awful showing from the Browns on Sunday. Deshaun Watson looked terrible. Just wasting that contract that he got from Cleveland.
The battle of the 230 million boys. That's what I'm going to call it. Something that I definitely felt like went well for the Cowboys was that they were able to establish the fact that They were going to come out strong. And I feel like they do well with doing that every season, kind of showing us that they will be a dominant force. Going forward, I think they just need to involve CeeDee Lamb more, but that was more game script.
Yeah, there wasn't really a point in the game where Dallas was worried of losing the lead, worried of anything. So they stuck with what they knew. They found whoever was open and just did what they did best, drive down the field and score their points. They looked amazing against this arguably top 5, top 3 Browns defense, and I don't think they're going to be slowing down for the rest of the year. And the outlook on CeeDee Lamb, the split between Dowdle and Zeke, I think they're all going to be good, viable fantasy options. With Jake Ferguson's injury, thank God it's not an ACL, it's just an MCL sprain. Once he comes back in a few weeks, he's also going to be a great plug and play in your lineup. Outside of that, Brandon Cooks caught one of the touchdowns from Dak Prescott. One of my boys loves Brandon Cooks. He's drafted him every year for the last 5 years, and he swears by him. And I think this year he's going to be a great number 2 in that offense. And if you got him in your 12th, 13th, 14th round, I'm sure you're smiling right now.
Sean caught another case. Let's talk about the Browns. They looked bad. They looked very, very bad. And I think a lot of it was Deshaun Watson. I think we can put a lot of the pressure on him. It's been on him to really perform, and he hasn't really shown us that. I think that there's a lot going on as far as the legal side that there's no reason to discuss, but if things really progress and we have to see another quarterback step in, guys like Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, Jerome Ford, all these guys could benefit, but I think as far as it goes right now, we might have to just push the brakes on them a little bit.
I still have a positive outlook for the Browns offense this coming season. I think if Deshaun Watson keeps up the play that he's playing now, it might be a good option to look into Jameis Winston on the waiver wire and see if you could scoop him up, because he might end up starting. Moving on to Sunday Night Football, we had the NFC wildcard round rematch between the Detroit Lions and the Los Angeles Rams. A lot of takeaways from this game. My biggest one, do not panic on Amon-Ra St. Brown. That Lions game script was solely to run the ball. They took their shots when they could, but they were giving what the Rams defense was giving him. And I don't think that Amon-Ra St. Brown's production is going to go down the rest of the season. He's still a wide receiver 1, and I think he's going to produce at a very high level again this year. So no, don't panic. But if people are panicking, I would try to buy low on him and see if you can plug him into your lineup.
Another guy that you might want to look into acquiring is Jameson Williams. I think that he could step in and be the number 2 receiver behind Amon-Ra St. Brown, and not necessarily vulture targets, but they could use his big playability to really explode games sometimes. We've seen Jared Goff put up, 55 points a couple years ago, so it's not unlikely that everyone can eat in this offense.
I think Jameson Williams is a lot like Xavier Worthy for me. They both have great boom or bust ability. They're both great weapons in their offense, but you're going to have weeks where they don't do anything, and you're going to have weeks where they absolutely go off like they did in week 1. Continuing with this Lions offense, we saw Gibbs and Montgomery both look great on Sunday. Montgomery ran it in for a touchdown. He had 17 carries for 91 yards. Then we also had Gibbs run one into the end zone, and he looked very explosive and great in that offense. I think both of these guys are going to be great options going forward. Montgomery was a steal in the 6th, 7th round, and I think he could be a league winner for some people if they keep up this pace for the rest of the year.
In terms of the Rams, I think obviously the biggest takeaway is what's going to happen with Puka, him landing on IR, and on top of that, what does this mean for Cooper Kupp? Does this establish him as potentially a top 10 wide receiver each week? And I think he's right around there. I think we have him as a fringe, maybe top 10, top 12 guy, as long as Stafford is continuing to feed him that volume. We call Stafford the wide receiver maker out here. So he's going to be a guy who steps in, gets between 20 and 30 points a game in fantasy.
Guys to look out in that Rams offense, you can pick up Jordan Whittington or Demarcus Robinson. They're both going to step into Puka's role for the next few weeks and could see a lot of volume and targets coming their way. And I think they're definitely great additions.
The big question mark in this offense was Kyren Williams' production, Kyren Williams' volume, and how specifically Blake Corum was going to eat into that. We saw week 1, it was Ronnie Rivers. It was not Blake Corum as the number 2. That's definitely discouraging to Blake Corum owners, but what I will tell you is that Kyren Williams is safe, and if he does go down with injury, I still think Blake Corum steps in as the number 1, but not a great spot for him to be in right now.
Moving on to the last game of week 1, which was last night, we had the Jets versus the Niners. Obviously, I'm a Niners fan. We played absolutely outstanding yesterday. A couple disappointing things that I had from yesterday is that we weren't able to convert when we got into the opposing territory. We saw Jake Moody kick 6 field goals. I mean, it's good that he's making them now. We saw him miss an extra point in the Super Bowl, which just devastating. Great to see that he improved on it in the offseason and he was hitting these consistently. Put up 26 fantasy points. And my second biggest thing was, dude, Brandon Ayuk. We paid him $30 million. He sat out the whole offseason and he dropped 2 balls. Come on. What are we doing? That's why you got to report to training camp. I'm not panicking on him. I mean, he was a little rusty, but not what you want to see out of probably your second, third round pick in fantasy drafts this year. And especially as a Niners fan coming into the season excited.
Something that I think Niners fans like you can be excited about is Debo getting that rushing volume back and that rushing ability. We've all seen what he does with the ball in his hands, and I think if McCaffrey is out for another week, being next week, then I think Debo will continue to see some carries.
Yeah. Speaking of McCaffrey potentially being out on Sunday against Minnesota, our favorite waiver wire pickup for the following week is going to be Jordan Mason. He brought in 28 carries for 147 yards and a touchdown, and he got some work in the passing game, bringing in 2 receptions. Jordan Mason's biggest negative coming into the season from the 49ers coaching was that he wasn't able to catch balls, and we saw that he improved on that and was able to bring those in. And he was looking like prime Marshawn Lynch out there. So going into week 2, despite them not having McCaffrey, I think Jordan Mason will be a great replacement, and San Francisco will keep rolling.
Speaking of the Niners coaching, we'd love to hear more than 10 minutes before game time what's going on with Mason and McCaffrey. We'll have to see what develops from that situation, but do not ask Jordan Mason when he knew that he was playing.
Yeah. Outside of that, we saw Debo get into the end zone. We saw Kittle bring in 4 catches for 40 yards, and then, like we said, Ayuk only brought in 2 catches for 28. I'm not panicking. The Jets have a top 5 defense in the league. Sauce Gardner was blanketing Ayuk for most of the game, so he wasn't seeing a lot of targets anyway. I think going forward, when they play like weaker secondaries, weaker defenses, these guys have the potential to eat up and get a lot of fantasy points and yards for your guys' teams.
In terms of the Jets offense, I thought that first scoring drive really showed us what we wanted to see. Garrett Wilson getting those intermediate targets and catches, went 4 for 4 for 46 yards just in those first couple of minutes. Now, obviously, it wasn't great to see them kind of fall off after that. Aaron Rodgers' mobility is a little bit of a concern, but if he can step in and make the throws against not as great defenses, we all know the Niners defense is going to dominate whoever they play. Garrett Wilson is going to be locked in as a top 10 receiver. And Breece Hall, really, his volume was really encouraging to me. Obviously, that Fred Warner, man, just absolutely dominated Breece Hall most of the game. But there was a lot of receiving work, a lot of ability for Breece Hall to step in there and do really well. And we didn't really see Braylon Allen until fourth quarter, I think.
Yeah, it was the 2-minute drill.
Yeah.
For most of that game, the only players who touched the ball on the Jets side were Aaron Rodgers, Allen Lazard, Garrett Wilson, and Breece Hall. They were the only 4 players who touched the ball until that last drive of the fourth quarter. I do not expect this to remain the same, but it's a little concerning if you're a Jets fan or just watching the game.
In terms of Allen Lazard, I don't love him as a waiver wire pickup. I know he's going to be a popular waiver wire ad this week, no matter what anyone says. But I do think that there's a lot of mouths to feed in the Jets offense, and like you said it best, the only people to touch the ball are going to be him, Breece, and Aaron Rodgers, Breece Hall, and Garrett Wilson. And then there's Corley, there's Mike Williams, who only played about 10, 15, no meaningful snaps even, along with Xavier Gibson. So don't love Allen Lazard as a pickup for this week.
Thank you guys for tuning in. This was our Week 1 review. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more if you're interested, and keep a lookout for our Week 2 preview.